right, welcome back to part 4 of our 4-part educational series. I hope you are learning a lot, and more importantly than just learning, hopefully you've started to take action on some of this stuff because education is the first piece, and then having that momentum, taking action is the most important step. So today, Rebecca and I are super excited to talk to you about the magic of muscle, which to me is a secret. It's like a secret key in the key to health and longevity. So, Rebecca, anything you want to add before we dive in?
I'm just really excited about this topic because I feel like it's such a funny concept for women. There's just so much resistance around, which no pun intended, like resistance training. Resistance around focusing on building muscle because women are just like, I don't want to bulk up. And so yeah, I'm just excited to jump into this topic and clear up some of those misconceptions and really kind of like free them up to move forward quicker because the
Yeah,
more they can do this, the faster the results, I think. So anyway, I know
yeah,
you're going to get into that more.
yeah. Awesome. Well, as I'm sure you can tell by now, I'm always a big fan of quotes and stats. So we're going to start with more stats on why you should care about age-related muscle loss. So women lose approximately 3 to 8% of their muscle every decade after the age of 30. And again, the question, okay, great, why do I care? Like Rebecca said, sometimes people are afraid of being bulky. They're like, I don't, or maybe they even think I don't have much muscle, not a big deal, right? Why you should care is because this effectively lowers your resting metabolic rate, making it harder to maintain a healthy weight and to burn calories even when you're at rest. So that 3 to 8% muscle that you're losing every decade typically will equate to about 5 pounds of muscle loss per decade, which is a lot of muscle. And that 5 pounds, for every 5 pounds of muscle you lose, that can often equate to 15 pounds of fat added to your frame um, without doing anything different, right? Which is why when I'm meeting with clients, the very first thing they tell me when they hit 40 is, haven't done anything different over the last 10 years, but all of a sudden I'm up 10 to 15 pounds. Or, maybe the scale hasn't even changed much, but they just feel like their body's a little squishier. They don't feel as compact. They just don't feel like they used to. And that is because they haven't done anything differently. And that muscle has been lost and has been replaced with fat because of that. So,
And after 30, right? Like how many women in general have had kiddos? And so then they're like, oh, it's just my mom
yeah,
bod. It's that
right,
stubborn post-pregnancy weight. I
right,
just can't get it off. And so, or they're getting, in their 40s, perimenopause.
yeah,
Okay, I'm going to blame it on that.
right,
So, and there are factors with those things, but knowing that this is a thing, regardless of whether
yeah.
you have perimenopause craziness going on or whether you've even had kids or not, like this is something that's happening to all of us. I think is super helpful to understand and be like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And the way your figure looks is definitely one thing, and I know a lot of people are concerned about that. But even outside of that, muscle mass is closely tied to bone health, which is very, very important because strong muscle supports the bones, which will reduce your risk of osteoporosis and fractures later on in life. And a stat again for you, 20 to 30% of older adults who fall suffer serious injuries like fractures, head trauma, and then have an increased risk of death.
Hmm.
It seems like when you're in your 30s and 40s, it's not something that you think will happen, right? How often do you trip, you fall, nothing really happens. But um, a fall is the leading cause of injury-related death for those over 65. And anyone or approximately 20 to 30% of older adults who suffer a hip fracture end up dying within a year. And to me, that's a sobering statistic because at 48, 65 isn't that far into my future. And something as simple as, if I fall and if I fracture something, the thought of dying a year later because of that is very sobering. And it's because of that age related muscle loss, which affects your bone health. So, muscle matters. Muscle is the key to longevity. It's super crucial. It's more than just fitting into your jeans or liking the way you look in a dress. It's your longevity organ. Muscle is your
Hmm.
longevity organ.
Yeah, for sure. And bone density doesn't change overnight. It's a
Right.
really, really slow, gradual thing. And obviously, you don't feel it happening.
Mhm.
So, yeah, the muscle, like the strength resistance training, mineral deficiencies or collagen, like some of those nutrients that are really key for bone health. And hormone is helpful, but the physical activity part of it is just critical for
Right.
sure.
Right. And I think perhaps 20 years from now, maybe this won't have to be as big of a conversation because I feel like my teenagers, they see me lifting. Their trainer, their cross country coach has them lifting. So I feel like it's become more common or less uncommon, let's say, for teenagers. But when I was in my teens, it was not lifting. Like the gym was for the football players. The cheerleaders, we jogged around the track, if that, right? Like we didn't that was our
True.
exercise. In our gym class, like the boys often lifted and the girls got to walk, or we played dodgeball, which was my least favorite activity known to man. So it wasn't I was the girl. My husband said he never would have dated me if we met in high school. I would just pretend to get out. As soon as the game started, I'm like, I got hit, and I would sit down. I hated dodgeball. Terrible game known to me. Anyway, for people of our age, the 30s, 40s, even the low 50s, we didn't have the benefit of really building our muscle and building our bone health in our 20s. That's when you build the
True.
bulk of your muscle and your bone health. So now we almost have to do a little more than we would have
Mm.
had we started to
I
build.
didn't think about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a really good point.
You have the best ability to build your muscle and then impact your bones
So,
in your
so
20s.
for the moms listening right now, encouraging your kids
Yeah.
at a younger age to do muscle like strength training, um, that's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Your hormones are on your side. You've got the most amount of ability to build muscle and to protect your bones,
And
as
then
well as,
maintaining that moving
yeah,
forward.
yeah,
Yeah.
as well as nutrition in your 20s. And unfortunately, I know myself included, I did not eat enough in my 20s. I think a lot of us, we were of the generation of being tiny, right? So I was definitely underfueled. So I wasn't lifting, I was underfueled, borderline eating stuff, which I think most of us had, or I had, let's speak for myself. So I'm starting in a deficit, and I know I'm starting in a
Mm-hmm.
deficit because
Mm-hmm.
I've done bone scans. So it's really, really important for your kids to get them lifting, and then now to realize it's not too late. It's never too late. So that's why we're sorry. That's why we're talking about this today. We could go off on a long tangent. Okay, so I don't like to be the person who just throws bad news at you and walks away. So what can you do to combat age-related muscle loss? So these are the things we're going to talk about today. Strength training, protein intake, making sure that you are not just getting your macros, which, protein, carbs, and fat, but really focusing on the quality of that food with the micronutrients. Gut health. I don't think one of our talks can be complete without talking about the importance of gut health, and of course, eliminating toxins. And as you'll see, there's so much overlap in health. So nothing is done in a silo. Everything really relates to each other. Strength training is probably one of my very most favorite topics. And strength training is more than just lifting. I hate to call them the little pink weights, but I feel like everybody has that visual, right? Because when I was in my 20s, if I did a Jane Fonda video, it was with the little pink weights and you would feel the burn, right? You would do like 90 leg lifts with the ankle weights strapped on your ankles. And she would say, feel the burn. You were lifting very, very light for a very, very long time. And that, unfortunately, is not the type of stimulus that we need to build muscle. And before you hit stop that you don't want to listen to the rest of this, I don't want you thinking, I don't want to be bulky. I don't want to lift heavy because I don't want to get big. It is nearly impossible for women to get bulky. Women try very, very hard for very, very long, and most often are supplementing with things. And I'm not just talking about protein powder, but I'm talking about external steroids to get what you would probably call that bulky look. We don't have the hormones. Most of the women that I work with aren't eating in a surplus. They're trying to eat at maintenance or even in a deficit. And the older we get, our bodies are just not able to put on large amounts of muscle. So we would be very, very hard pressed to even put on probably 5 pounds of muscle a year would be a lot of muscle for a woman to put on. And because I'm sure you've all heard that muscle weighs less than fat. It really doesn't weigh less. A pound of muscle weighs the same as a pound of fat. However, it takes up less space. So if you lost a pound of muscle, or if you lost a pound of fat and added a pound of muscle, you would fit
You'd be smaller.
yeah, you'd be smaller. It takes up less space. So that is why lifting heavy is essential. Heavy
Yeah.
doesn't have to mean, so let's say you're in your 60s and listening to this and you're like, I could never lift, 100-pound barbell. Well, you don't have to. So it's heavy for you. So if you are lifting 20 pounds and that's really freaking heavy for you, that's lifting heavy. The next step to lifting heavy for strength training is progressive overload. So you want to make sure that you don't, let's say you're doing bicep curls and you grab 10-pound weights today. If in a month or two you're still lifting 10 pounds, you're not going to be giving your muscle the stimulus it needs to develop. You need to progressively overload the muscle, whether that's an extra rep or that's extra weight. And that's what we mean by progressive overload. Muscles, our bodies in general, are so good at adapting. And that adaptation is the muscle developing, right? But if you don't give it a new stimulus, i.e., more weight or more reps, it has no need to do anymore. It's kind of like a teenager where they're going to rise to the level that you ask them to rise, right? If I say, load your dish, you better bet the only thing my teenager's doing is loading the dish, not the spoon or the cup or wiping the crumbs, right? So that's kind of like what our muscle does. We need to always be pushing it a little bit more so that it gets toned or built or whatever word you feel comfortable with. What helps in order to do that is a truly structured program. I know a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm doing a Beachbody program, or I go to the gym every once in a while for their program. But what happens if you do like this program this day and this program this day is that your muscle isn't getting that progressive overload, that stimulus it needs to grow and to develop. So I know when maybe like 5-ish years ago, muscle confusion was kind of the thing that everybody thought you had to do. You wanted to constantly confuse your muscles. Well, that has been debunked, and they found that when your muscles are, you really can't confuse it. But if you don't do the same thing in a structured approach over the course of a month, 2 months, 3 months, the muscle doesn't have the stimulus it needs to develop. And so muscle confusion actually does not help with developing your muscle. Another big key to strength training the older we get is taking adequate rest periods while you're working out. So again, I know that around here we have Orange Theory, and their big thing is go, 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 go all the time, right? You do bicep curls, you do burpees, then you do leg presses or whatever it may be, and they don't let you rest at all. One of the things this causes is an increase in cortisol, which is your stress hormone, which by now I'm sure you've heard a lot about. Um, and cortisol, remember, is catabolic, and that causes your muscles to break down. So the other thing that happens when you aren't taking adequate rest periods is that you are not able to lift as heavy as you need to develop that muscle. So when I build a strength training program, it's very common to have 90-second rests between each move so that your nervous system is recovered, your muscles are recovered, and you can lift just as heavy that second set and that third set, etc. So circuits are essentially cardiovascular workouts. So sometimes people will think they're lifting, but they're really just doing a cardio workout with weights in their hands. And so that's not the stimulus you need to build the muscle to protect your bones. And also adequate rest at night is so important. As women, we are so good at saying, what do I need to do? I'm going to put it on my schedule and I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
And so okay, you want me to strength train? Check. You want me to eat my protein? Check. But the one thing they're not good at doing is getting their rest at night. And we talked about sleep a lot on the last week's call. So if you haven't watched that, make sure you listen to that. But muscles are not built in the gym. Muscles are built at rest because remember, we talked about when human growth hormone is produced between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. And cortisol is catabolic, that breaks you down. We need sleep so that we can move into our anabolic window. And that is when your muscles are going to be repaired. In addition to if you're really tired, it's just really hard to lift. But from an internal perspective, at sleep is when you're repairing those muscles, and that's when they're growing. Rebekah, anything else you want to add on the strength training page of
I
muscle?
mean, you covered it
Okay.
great, obviously. But yeah, it does make me think of like, I would say the flip side, we want to really help support this side of it, but I want women to know, the people who are listening to know that we want it to be balanced. So
Yeah.
I think, more is not always better. Like I
Yeah.
will say we kind of are in like the healthy balance. Our goal is health. So with bodybuilders, like how Julie was saying, they have to do exogenous support to build to that level. They have to be extremely strict. We're not asking you to be a
No.
bodybuilder like that. That's where like women start losing their cycle. They start
Yeah,
their other systems start shutting down because
yeah,
it's too extreme.
yeah,
So we would never, ever, ever want you to get to the point where you're pushing your body too hard. But
yeah,
there is this huge gap,
yeah,
especially for women and men too, to
yeah,
not push themselves hard enough and
yeah,
challenge their bodies and believe their body is capable of more, and just
yeah,
having that mindset of like, oh, what can my body like push and
yeah,
do, is a really like it's a the endorphins from that is great
yeah,
too.
yeah,
But we would never want you to go too far with that.
right,
Never. And we would all obviously, like if someone came to us who was coming from that side of things, Julie's already talked about having
yeah,
to talk with clients about resting more,
yeah,
because there is that balance with this.
yeah,
And the other
yeah,
thing that came to mind when we were talking about this was like long marathon runners and just this concept that a lot of us have where we see an athlete or we see someone who runs marathons or does these long extended things, and we assume that they're healthy, but I will say from research and my experience, like they have a ton of inflammation, a ton of
yeah,
oxidative stress. They're actually more increased risk for cancer because there's so much constant inflammation happening. There's not enough balance and rest going on.
yeah,
And so I would just, my point is we want optimal health.
yeah,
And so sometimes like that concept of thinking that someone's super healthy because they run marathons, again, that's like an assumption. And we want to look at lab work, we want to look at their health, and make sure that they're not taking it too far because there is that side of it too.
yeah,
So we would never want either one where you're not
yeah,
building up enough health and strength, and we wouldn't want the other side either. So I just
yeah,
wanted to make that
yeah. No, that's a great point, and I probably should have added that you don't have to. I never would want anyone to lift 5, 6, 7 days a week. Brand new people, like if you've never picked up a weight in your life, I start them at 2 days a week. For most people, I have them lifting 3, maybe 4 days a week if they have a very specific goal. But most of my clients are lifting 3 days a week because in addition to adequate rest periods while you're working out, having adequate rest periods between your days of your working out is just as important. So most of my clients lift Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
And
Um,
how do you navigate if someone is like, their body's a little bit more worn out and
yeah,
depleted and burnt out, and they're like, okay, I exercised, Julie, and now I'm dead the next day, or
yeah,
like it takes me 3 days to feel
yeah,
like I'm not super sore anymore. Like,
yeah, yeah.
how would you support that person?
That's fabulous. We didn't even plan that transition into our next slide on it's as if you knew it was coming. But seriously, I do have clients who, when they come to me, they say, there's no way I can lift because when I do, I'm exhausted, my muscles hurt, I can't get on and off the toilet. I literally can't do my daily life. And so I dive into their nutritionist. The first thing I look at, their sleep and their rest. If they're under resting, I tell them you have to sleep because you can't repair what you broke down if you're not sleeping. The next thing we look at is their diet. Quite often what I'm finding is that they're eating way too many carbs. And when I say that, I don't mean to demonize any food group. Every
Sure.
macro has an important part of total health. However, what I find is a lot of my clients were of my generation where carbs were king. That's what we were supposed to eat, right? Carbs, they were the bottom of the food pyramid that we were,
Base of the pyramid.
yeah,
Yep.
we were tested on that in what, seventh or eighth grade. I can still remember what 7 or 8 carbs, and it was like junky carbs too at the time, cereal and whatever else. So once we dive into what they're eating, once I make those changes to what they're eating, they're blown away by how good they feel when they're working out. Then they sleep and they're like, oh, I'm ready to go the next day or the day after. So it's really important to give your body and your muscles the fuel, the building blocks, and the components that it needs to do what we're asking it to do. So it is not, I've never met somebody who isn't able to lift because they don't feel well enough the next day or two. Well, they start that way, but then once we really change their sleep, their lifestyle, their stress, and their food, then they realize that they can do a whole lot more than they thought they could. Um,
Yeah. And I often see where someone has blood sugar, they don't oftentimes don't realize because everyone feels like they're starting out with a healthy diet. I feel
Yeah.
like everyone's like, I eat pretty good.
Yeah.
And they've shown research where
Yeah.
they poll Americans and like 70 to 80% of people believe they're eating a healthy diet
Yeah.
or a balanced diet. They're like
Yeah.
80/20, I'm good,
Yeah. Yeah.
But the statistics are the majority of us are overweight or pre-diabetic
Yeah.
or, having
Yeah.
chronic inflammation and autoimmune disease. Like, I think that we need to be like a
Yeah.
little bit more
Yeah.
open-minded to like, is my nutrition helping me or hurting
Yeah.
me? And so, one of the things with like the soreness that a lot of people don't realize is like you're going to struggle with that more if you have blood sugar issues because that creates more lactic acid in the body. And so that's that soreness that you feel. So some people come to me and they're not even exercising and they already feel that like exercise soreness and you're like, I don't know why, but I'm just kind of always stiff and sore. It's that issue. So the fact that you're addressing that foundation of
Mhm.
blood sugar and kind of
Yeah.
the too much carbs, more protein, all that stuff, it makes so much sense that they're
Yeah.
not having as much soreness over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Your comment on the 80/20 cracked me up because everyone tells me, oh, I eat pretty well. I eat 80/20.
Everyone.
Everyone. And then when we do the math, like even if you think rough math, right? Like let's say your average maintenance calories is like 2000. So 20% of that is about 400 calories. And if you truly look at what you're eating of, the what people consider the 20, the junk, like if you have a bagel or had some ice cream or had chips, like it's way more than 400 calories in a day of what you're considering your 20. Like your 80% should be whole foods, things that do not come from a package, things that are single ingredient. And so, just out of curiosity, take a look at your day of what you're eating and truly see, is it 80/20 or is it most people I'm finding it's like 80, even though they think it's 80/20, it's literally flip-flopped of 80% is more processed and only 20% was the whole like single ingredient, like quote unquote healthy food. So it's just kind of interesting to see what your perception is
Hmm.
versus reality. Okay, anyway, back to protein intake. So protein, you're going to hear us talk a ton about protein if you work with us. And even if you don't work with us, protein is so foundational to health and to longevity, as well as any kind of body comp goal that you may have, whether that be trying to gain muscle, lose fat, maintain a healthy body. So protein is that critical component for building and maintaining muscle because it provides amino acids that your body needs to repair and grow muscle tissue. So the three ways it does that is one, through muscle protein synthesis. So to build muscle, your body must be in a state of positive muscle protein balance. So meaning muscle protein synthesis has to exceed muscle protein breakdown. So protein intake stimulates that muscle protein synthesis, especially after exercise. So if you are in the gym killing it all the time, but are not eating adequate protein intake, and or eating in an extreme deficit, so you're just in a nutritional deficit, that may be why you're not seeing the results that you're after. It could, I even have people tell me that not only are they not seeing results, but they're getting puffier or bigger, maybe
Mm,
fat, but that inflammation is starting to pick
right.
up because they're not giving their body the building blocks that it needs
To recover.
to balance out where they're tearing things down. It's back to that savings account, right? If you're constantly pulling from your savings account but never putting anything in, you're going to be in a major debt before too long.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So the next thing is amino acids. So proteins are broken down into amino acids. So the amino acids are the building blocks that are necessary for muscle repair. A big one is leucine, which is, I'm sure you've heard of like branch chain amino acids. So leucine is a branch chain amino acid. That's the one that's particularly important for stimulating muscle protein synthesis. So remember, you are not what you eat, you are what you break down and digest. So protein is like the biggest block, and then it needs to be
Hmm.
broken down into those amino acids for muscle protein synthesis. So I discovered maybe last year this was a big roadblock for me because my gut was a wreck. And I was learning like I was eating all the protein I was supposed to be eating, but I wasn't breaking it down. So it was just sitting there, and it was so eye-opening to me how much of a difference that makes in having proper gut health. Gut health was something that I am embarrassed to say I ignored for far too long, thinking it was not that important. I'm like, I'm lifting, I'm eating my protein, I'm getting my sleep, but I totally ignored.
And you're like, I'm regular every
Yeah,
day.
I
I'm
was,
not,
yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
constipated or I'm not having
yeah,
diarrhea. So you
yeah.
think everything's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's a big component of it. I know the question most people ask is, okay, how much protein do I have to eat? So as a general guideline, I know everybody has their unique needs, but a good rule of thumb is 1 gram of protein per pound of target body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, but your target body weight is 150, then 150 grams of protein would be your ideal grams of protein to start with. It is oddly enough, it's even more important for older adults to hit that threshold, and it's even more important when you're in a deficit. So if you're an older adult who is in a deficit, you actually have those higher protein needs than when you're 20. So I know for a lot of
And usually it's flip-flopped.
yeah, right.
Usually the older someone gets, the lower their
Yeah,
appetite. They're eating like a little bird,
yeah,
they have like little nuts or little
yeah,
salad or,
yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah,
And
I see that a lot.
yeah, it's super fascinating to me. And I know sometimes people hear, like if you're not tracking your protein or if you hear that number, if you're currently eating 60 grams of protein today, I wouldn't expect you to eat, if your goal is
No,
150 tomorrow, right? That's
no.
not
Please
realistic.
don't make yourself
No,
sick.
you'll be ill. You'll be like, this is ridiculous. Julie and Rebecca do not know what they're talking about. Like, it's impossible. So, if you're at 60, the next day, try for 70. Stick with that for a few days, then try for 80. Just work your way up slowly to allow your body to adjust, to find your favorites. And I think you'll find it's not as hard as you think it is. For a lot of people, it could be as simple as going from like, some people literally, when I was looking at their intakes, they were eating 1 ounce of chicken on a salad. I'm like, okay, could we go to two? Like literally, you just slowly build it up over time. It does not have to be a ginormous steak at
Mhm.
breakfast, lunch, and dinner unless you want to eat that. But it doesn't have to be this really, really difficult thing. You can layer some seeds in, layer a little bit of cheese on a salad. You can make a very simple salad go from 10 grams of protein to 40 pretty easily and not really changing the food volume that you're consuming.
Mhm.
And that's another point that I probably should have added here, that timing also matters, right? So I wouldn't, you would feel sick, but you won't have as good results if you don't eat any protein all day and then you're like,
Yep.
oh shoot, I got to get 100
Yep.
grams at dinner. And then you just have this ginormous stack of meats
Hmm.
at dinner.
And so many of us are doing that. We're
Yeah.
not having a good breakfast. We're having
Yeah.
oatmeal for breakfast or
Yeah.
some,
Right.
maybe a small yogurt,
Yeah.
maybe a protein bar
Yeah. Oh yeah.
that's
Those
like
are,
maybe 10 grams or something.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, skating through the day and then trying to eat some meat
Yeah.
later. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, or protein later. Yeah.
Right. So you really want to take your total grams of protein for the day and divide it out. If you get really nerdy, it seems like 30 grams of protein is the quantity that it takes to turn on that muscle protein synthesis. So making sure you get a minimum of 30 per meal is a great way to start.
A couple more things I just
Yeah.
wanted to say before you move into
Yeah.
micronutrients. The types of protein are very different on what can be, we
Yeah.
talked about digestion and there's a chart and we can share this maybe on the weight loss page or something, but there's a chart that breaks down the absorbability
Yeah.
of different types of protein. So there might be a pea protein or a rice protein or different plant-based proteins versus animal-based proteins. And they've shown that outside of like soy, um, tofu, that type of protein, that has good absorbability. That's one of like the one rare plant foods, but a lot of people don't necessarily want to eat soy because a lot of sources are GMO and they're like concerns with estrogen. But all of that aside, the other plant proteins like rice and hemp and pea, the percentage that's absorbed is like basically around half.
Hmm.
So I often tell people, look at your protein, Truvani or different protein powders that are really clean. That's great. But if it's all plant-based proteins other than soy or tofu, then you're getting about half. So you would need to double the amount of your scoops to get what it says on the label because
Mm,
it might say 20 grams, but your body's actually absorbing half of that. So that's one thing that I do like to point out when people are thinking about hitting their protein gram intake. They might not realize that they're not actually getting that. The label can be a little
right.
misleading in that
Yeah.
area. So just
Yeah.
wanted to mention that real quick before we move on.
Yeah, and that's another good point with regard to vegetarians and vegans and hitting this protein intake threshold. So, people often ask, "Do you work with vegetarians and vegans?" And absolutely, anybody who wants to get healthier, would love to work with. The biggest thing that I've seen in my clients that I work with is that it's very, very difficult for vegetarians and vegans to hit like Rebecca was talking about, the quality of the protein, the type of protein. Um, that's only present in the animal sources. And with that, because yes, you could, work your way with beans and nuts, um, and like the quinoa type sources, you could get maybe close to 100 grams of protein. But what happens is that they're quite often or always tied with a carbohydrate source, which can then make your blood sugar regulation as well as just total calorie load more difficult to reach the body comp goal that you are after. And I was telling Rebecca before this call that when I was going through cancer treatment, I went vegan for a bit, probably like a year and a half. And during that year, I noticed my body composition shifting. I got softer in the middle. My energy was lower. My hair quality, even post treatment, wasn't the same as it used to be. I found that I was always hungry. I was never satisfied. My muscle was non-existent. And it's because it was very difficult for me to keep my calories where I needed them to be, to get the protein I needed for muscle development, and without way overshooting my carbohydrates, and then keeping my blood sugar steady. So it's just something that I like to talk about. I realize everybody has different religious preferences, moral preferences, if you're open to trying, if you're a vegetarian currently or a vegan currently, and you just kind of, some people just try different things, right? And you're like, oh, my body composition isn't where it wanted is. I know the doctor told me I have blood sugar issues. My energy is very low. I have this midsection that's kind of coming out of nowhere. If you're willing to try something for 3, 6, 9 months and to see how protein may improve a lot of things in your physique, in your mental clarity. I also noticed a lot of brain fog when I wasn't eating enough protein. It could be something that can be really beneficial for your total health.
Yeah. And one more really quick thing is when people talk about like there's some people who have told me, well, I just don't feel good when I eat meat. It just like feels uncomfortable in my stomach. Or they're like, I have zero appetite in the morning. There's reasons for that. So that's not so much a solution to just not eat in the morning or not eat meat. That's not fixing the issue. So the issue would be that your digestion is poor in your stomach. So that meat sitting there is a sign that your stomach acid levels are not where they should be. There's different ways to approach that I won't go into, but that's one thing that needs to be fixed. And then in the morning, not having that appetite, maybe you're eating too late
Yeah.
or just gradually eating like a small amount and gradually increasing it each morning, whether you have the appetite or not, but training your brain and your body to have more of an appetite in the morning, it's so important. It's so helpful. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That morning, I think it's very common for a lot of women, at least the ones that talk to me, to say they're not hungry in the morning. And what I've found quite often is that those are the women who are running on cortisol. So if
yeah.
you wake up and are not hungry, it's quite often your body is running on cortisol, and it's running on blood sugar. So once we start addressing sleep, stress management, and then balancing the blood sugar throughout the day through the techniques that we use. I love getting the texts where they're like, "Oh my gosh, I was hungry when I woke up." It's like it's an epiphany, and it's such a great sign that the body is now burning
Hmm.
like it should be, and not just burning blood sugars all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So micronutrients. So Food quality matters. That is one of the things you'll hear me say over and over again. Macros are great, but micros also matter. And they matter for a lot of reasons, but especially in muscle building, like we're talking about today, because they help support processes like energy production, muscle contraction, recovery, and then that muscle protein synthesis that we talked about. And so while deficiencies can impair muscle building, optimal levels will enhance performance, recovery, and growth. So it's super important. A balanced, nutrient-dense diet with diverse whole foods will typically cover all these things that you see here. So I don't want you to obsess over each and every of those micronutrients. Like vitamin D, check, magnesium, check. Nope. Just, I always tell my clients, aim for at a minimum 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. And I give them the visual to have 5 colors a day. So 1 to 2 fruits, 4+ veggies in a variety of colors. And for the most part, if your gut is in good order, that will make sure that you get this wide spectrum of the micronutrients that you need. And yes, it can be difficult to get all the micros from your diet, even when you eat that really well-balanced diet, for a lot of reasons. A main one being our soil is not as healthy as it was 40 years ago. So supplementation may be necessary for specific deficiencies, and that's when testing can be very helpful. So I don't expect you to just run out and get like a calcium or an iron supplement. Start with fiber and the colors, and then if you are still not feeling your best, or if you feel like you're doing all these things and you're not seeing the progress that you want, that's when some lab testing could be done, and then specific targeted supplementation can be really important. Okay, so back to our favorite topic of gut health. Like we said, you are not just what you eat, but you are what you digest. So gut health, it's so significant in, again, a lot of things, but specifically we're talking about muscle building today, because it directly impacts nutrient absorption, inflammation levels, immune function, and even hormone regulation. And all of those are critical for muscle repair and growth. So when it comes to muscle building, muscle building requires protein, vitamins, and minerals, and all of those are absorbed in the gut. So a compromised gut, like we talked about, leaky gut or some amount of dysbiosis, like imbalance, it'll reduce the efficiency of that nutrient absorption, and then it limits the building blocks for muscle growth. So like I gave you the example of, I was eating my protein, but my gut was a mess, and that is because of my gut health. I wasn't getting the building blocks that I needed. So it's really important to make sure that you dive into your gut health for total health, and specifically for muscle and then bone health. And then we also mentioned toxins on a lot of the previous discussions that we've had. But environmental exposures, they can really negatively affect your muscle health. So in addition to like the things that everybody thinks about, right? Smoking, alcohol, there are toxins that can impair muscle growth, the muscle function and recovery because of oxidative stress, hormonal disruption, and inflammation. And I know I feel like we've talked about these on a lot of calls. So heavy metals, things like contaminated water. If you haven't checked your water, you can Google to get the report for your locality. At least you can in Pennsylvania. I'm assuming you can in other areas, to see what's in your local water. And then you can make sure that you get a filter, either specifically for those things or just a really high quality filter. Pesticides and herbicides, making sure that you're not spraying your lawn, spraying your garden. I know a lot, it's really easy for people to say like, oh, there's a weed, I'm just going to spray it. But that affects, even though it's outside, that's going to be affecting your overall health as well. I know everybody's heard about glyphosate. And so glyphosate is a really detrimental toxin to everybody, especially to your gut health. Air pollutants, things like vehicles, industrial pollution, chronic stress, that's another toxin that can really be detrimental to your hormones. Processed food, if you eat a lot of processed food and you're consuming artificial sweeteners, preservatives, that causes inflammation and disrupting your gut microbiome, and that indirectly affects absorption and then muscle function. Even things like pharmaceutical toxins, right? The statins that you may be on, chemotherapy drugs. I learned way after the fact how detrimental chemo was to my bone health and my gut health. I wouldn't have picked a different option at the time. It's something I needed to do. But because of that, now I'm kind of playing a little bit of catch up there. Even excess sugar, right? So high sugar can lead to that inflammation, insulin resistance, fat accumulation, and all of that affects muscle quality. So it's really important to address what we're putting in our body, what we're putting on our skin, what we're breathing in, and just try to eliminate as many of those toxic behaviors as possible. So here we have another one of my clients who was eating pretty low cal for a long time. She was 65, well into menopause. She had always done walking and biking. She was pretty active. She was retired, but even when you're retired, she said she had a moderate amount of stress. She had, a husband. She had a part-time job, in-laws. So there's always a moderate amount of stress. And she was just experiencing what a lot of us experience, right? Weight gain, body aches were a big thing for her. She often described her knees would hurt a lot when she would walk up and down the steps. She would be uncomfortable bike riding because she said her back would just start to hurt. She couldn't go as long as she used to with her husband. So her goals, these are actually her afters, but she said that her goal was to look and feel great for her son's summer wedding. And she sent me this picture of her like totally strutting her stuff. She wanted to get out of pain. And she told me once that she walked down a flight of steps without gripping the handrail. And that was like the greatest day for her because she like got to the bottom. She's like, oh my gosh, that didn't hurt. And she called it like the old lady hold. She said, I didn't have to like hold
No,
like an old lady because she could do it just left, right foot. And then she had said she'd always wanted to wear a Barbie dress. In December, after, it was about 9 months working together, she got to wear her beautiful.
that
I
dress.
know, right? Isn't
Wow,
that
talk
gorgeous?
about her confidence.
I know.
That's
And so no,
awesome.
so she lost, what was her, 30 pounds. So she lost 30 pounds, which if you talk to a lot of 65-year-old women, they will say like, oh, I can't lose weight. It's impossible. Or like, this is, quote unquote, normal for a menopausal woman.
Mm.
But not only did she lose weight, but you can see, like, look at her shoulder muscles. Look at the definition that she has been able to add to her frame. So in addition just to like looking and feeling better, we've added years to her life in longevity. Like she's able to carry her own suitcase. She said she didn't have to ask her husband to put her suitcase in the overhead compartment of the airplane. So that may seem like not a big deal for a lot of people currently. But she said she'd always given it to him or given it to the flight attendant. And she cracked up
And
because
if she wasn't able to do that at 65,
yeah,
where would she be at
right,
75? Where would
right,
she be at 85?
yeah, right,
So it's like, again, we're living very long nowadays. We
yeah,
want to maintain and build that momentum as long as possible because, she's got 10, 20 more years. And if she
yeah,
was already struggling with that, it
right,
doesn't get easier,
yeah,
right? As we
yeah,
age. So I think,
yeah,
and I love this example because she was already low calorie, right? Like
yeah,
I mean, people always talk about calories in, calories out. And,
yeah,
I'm sure I talk to clients all the time. They're like, oh, well, I walk every day or I bike every day. Like
yeah,
she was doing all those things.
yeah,
And you can see like the puffiness. I was
yeah,
noticing around her wrists
yeah,
and her
look at,
elbows,
yeah,
you can see like
yeah,
this puffiness, water retention, inflammation happening. And then on her, like you see her arms down in the red dress. So you can see how like she
yeah,
doesn't have that
yeah,
swelling
yeah,
and puffiness and inflammation, and
yeah,
her arms are just like toned.
yeah,
And yeah, I love this example.
yeah.
She looks amazing.
Yeah, and she was another one. She said she inspired her husband because they'd always had, she called it her clothing rack. I said, "Do you have like gym equipment at home?" She's like, "Well, I have a clothing rack." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Yeah, we have weights, but we just throw clothes on them." I'm like, "Okay, pull the clothes off of the weights, and we're gonna start to use them." And so she said she inspired her husband. So once she started lifting, he kind of laughed at her at first, like, "What are you doing?" That, because she started with 5 pounds dumbbell bench press. I think she got up to around 20 before she was done. And that was,
Awesome.
yeah, heavy for her, but that was enough to provide the stimulus that she needed for that muscle to lose weight, which is what she wanted, and to gain muscle. And then you can see like she was maintaining it. So that's the biggest thing, is not just being able to lose weight, but to be able to build a strong, flexible metabolism to be able to maintain that weight. And so the things we did with her, we really focus on her blood sugar because she described like 2 or 3 o'clock crashes a lot, not being able to make it through the day. For her job that she volunteered at, she felt like a little foggy. So we really focused on stable blood sugar, moving for stable blood sugar. We increased her calories and we increased her protein. She, I think, was right around that like 60 grams when we did her pre-tracking week. And same thing, she's like, she always jokingly called herself a little old lady. She's like, I'm a little old lady, I'm never hungry. So we slowly built it up. And then she discovered, oh, wow, once I'm putting logs on the fire, her metabolism
Yes.
really kicked in. So a fire is a great analogy that I use a lot of times. If you have a fireplace and if you have a couple little kindling pieces in there,
It's gonna go out.
yeah, it's gonna go out or like not burn anymore, right? But you can't just throw a giant log on it because it will definitely go out. So you have to slowly increase it over time, and then you get that rip-roaring fire that you want. Rebecca was talking about you could kind of see the inflammation on her body. So detox was very important. Hydration, sweating, eliminating toxins. We added strength training with her with progressive overload. I do not have any clients who are not lifting. So lifting is it's a big rock. It's a big pillar. It's foundational for total health. My oldest client is 84. And she lifts weights in her basement. She's like the cutest woman. She sends me pictures all the time. She's lifting. We do it safely, what she's able to do, focusing on foundational movements to start. But everybody's able to lift weights. And then we added sprint interval training with her at the very end. We didn't start with that. We wanted to make sure that her core was strong enough. She had the cardiovascular base that she needed, but even she was able to add some sprint interval training at the end to just kind of take her to the next level. Stress management, everybody has very similar stress management goals because it's really foundational. She also had a really hard time sleeping. She said she would have a hard time going to sleep and or have a hard time staying asleep. So between the blood sugar, some targeted supplementation, and stress management, she was able to get up to that 7 or 8 hour window that I would like everybody to at least be at. I wrote, created a better sleep environment, which sounds nicer than we kicked the cats out of the bedroom. Yeah.
Oh.
She had cats that slept with her and she said they would meow all night long. And so we had a conversation are you okay having them go somewhere else? And so she did eventually move them out and she was like, I didn't realize how much that was disrupting my sleep. So sometimes
Yeah.
just like little things, as well as the TV. We got her TV and her Wi-Fi router out of her bedroom, and that made a big difference too. And then the supplementation, we did do some labs with her just to see where she was really missing and supporting her blood sugar with that. So I know that embarking on a health journey can absolutely feel overwhelming, isolating, especially when you're facing challenges that others may not understand, right? Maybe your friends aren't going through this, or maybe you're one of the oldest friends in your friend group. And there's something so powerful about surrounding yourself with a community of like-minded people who just get it, right? Um, a supportive community gives you encouragement. So if you're struggling, you just have those people around. It gives you accountability to help you stay on track. It's a space to share wins or struggles without anybody judging you. Sometimes you're just not going to feel it, right? And you need that group of people to say like, I've been there, here's what helped me, or just to listen to you. You're in a group of everybody working towards similar goals, and it's just easier to see that you're not alone. And I always tell my
And
client, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and also like sometimes you're just having a stinky
Yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah,
Like your kids are in a bad mood,
yeah,
and whatever, things are
yeah,
going wrong, and your day is just harder. And so you might share something in the group that, from your perspective, fe of feelings that day are like a negative. And then there's so many times where other people are, not having such a hard day, and they might
yeah,
see from a different perspective that's more
yeah,
positive, like, well, here's the silver lining of that, or like,
yeah,
hey, that's actually great. Like you're
yeah,
doing better than, whatever. And
yeah,
so having that mindset shift change from other people to lift you up on those harder days, I think
yeah.
that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, as well as having people at different stages of the journey, right? If you have
True.
somebody who is a few months ahead of you and you
And they're
can,
like, oh, girl, I know, I was
yeah,
there.
I've been there, right? And like it gets better. So yes, like you may be sore today, but just wait, like you're going to be lifting more or feeling stronger or seeing the results later. So it's just someone to kind of shine that reflection, that perception back for you, as well as you could be a light to others, right? Even in your
Mhm.
crappiest day, Somebody else could say like, I'm right there with you. Like, let's sit in this together. And so I always tell my clients, even though you're working out in your basement alone, you're never alone. You're with all these other women. And so, having that group where you can, I always tell them like post a sweaty selfie. So then when they're in the middle of workout, they can post their picture and everyone's like, you got it. Like, let's do this next, whatever set together. So community is so important. So it's emotional support, it's practical support. Like Rebekah was saying, like having somebody share that wisdom or the advice or just resources. Sometimes it's like, hey, I have no idea what I'm making for dinner tonight. Like, what do you do that's super quick? Just having people who have done it be able to share with that wisdom with you. So, we're no matter what we do, we're always stronger when we're together. So community is a reminder that, healing isn't just about doing it alone. It's about leaning on others and, allowing yourself to be supported as well as to support others. So I think that's one of the greatest benefits of being in a group program and or in an individual program that has that group component to it. And that's one of the biggest benefits, I think, of Nourish and Thrive is that you're not just working with one practitioner. You're not just doing it on your own. You're doing it either in a one-on-one setting, which is what we're calling Thrive Your Way, where you get the weekly accountability, that macro-based nutrition and strength programming, tons of education, and those like that weekly check-in with your coach, and then the monthly deep dives into
One-on-one.
where you're
Mm-hmm.
going. But you are able to participate in the group calls and the group chat and to really cheer people on that way as well. But then there's also, if you're like, hey, I don't need that much support, just being in the group program, still getting some, macro-based nutrition and the strength program, and tons of access to the group. Either whichever of those avenues feels like it is more aligned with what works for you. We've got that support kind of built in place for you there. And we've got a ton of information on the website about our Nourish and Thrive program. I know we've talked about it on all the previous calls, so I didn't want to go into a ton of it again. But like always, we are here for any questions that you have, whether you join the program or not. If you have questions about lifting or about gut health or about anything and just want to bounce a question off, like email me, email Rebekah. We're happy to help, because my goal for everybody is health, longevity, and just feeling your best. Because I feel like as a mom, if you're a mom and you've sacrificed probably for the last 20 some years for your kids, like this is our era now. This is the time to feel like yourself, to be your healthiest, to be a little selfish and take care of yourself. And so, I just want to be able to support, whether you're a mom or not, really be able to support you in that capacity.
Absolutely. I'm so happy that we got to share all this information today. And again, like Julie said, reach out if you need anything. I hope this was helpful series. I think this is just chock full of information between these last 4 videos. So hopefully that's been encouraging, giving you a lot of aha moments. And then if you need more from there, we're ready to go.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you.